that are taking place within the context of our domestic space. Our focus now is to continue to expand the existing economy as it is, but equally, sir, to add new and effective, sir, complementary activities that some of the existing services can help to support, but by the same token, sir, that we are in a position to attract new activities and new business lines into the domestic space in order to help broaden, sir, the base of economic activity in Barbados. And I believe that as we have come to this place over and over, sir, to send the message to the public, is that our engagement, sir, in the world has to be substantive. We do have, sir, a reasonably high standard of living in this country, if I say so myself. It requires attention, sir. And to the extent that we know the impact that COVID has had on the domestic space, given the structure of the economy as it is at the moment, that these pieces of legislation that were brought to this chamber and this piece here, I believe, will add significantly to our capacity, sir, to diversify. And that diversification, sir, comes with how we as domestic players, entities, equally, sir, can use these pieces of legislation proactively, if you like, in order to be able to see what is happening in other jurisdictions and allow for us to be able to create the kinds of linkages that are critical, sir, for Barbados to move forward. And I know that for some, the notion of international business is, as it was referred to, international business has not been clearly understood, and the extent to which a number of service providers, as well as, and these are service providers, sir, not just in the accounting and financial field, but many other service providers across the landscape with respect to the provision of services, has been one of the critical areas that this piece of legislation will seek to help to address as we bring more order with respect to how these things are enacted. And the truth is, sir, that we intend to attract more businesses that will be able to fit different levels, sir, of service provision. And the importance of that, sir, is to ensure that not only that we focus on some of the high-valued maybe products and services that are very specific, because as you know, sir, there are a number of companies operating in Barbados who do some very highly technical and specialized work, namely, sir, the manufacture of contact lenses and these types of very specialty items, strictly for export. But we want to which, of course, Barbadians are employed and have the skill to do. And therefore, as I know that the Honourable Member for St. Michael North is in his capacity in terms of what has been proposed by the Export Barbados, the BDIC, that we really want to open up the space, sir, to be able to attract more and more companies to Barbados, to expand the scope and the footprint of the economy. So this income tax country by country reporting bill, sir, in the first instance, speaks to companies that operate within the context of the global environment, sir. For the most part, large companies, companies that certainly have earnings in excess of 850 million US dollars, and how, sir, as a group, that the requirement for reporting globally is going to be structured, and the extent to which our participation, sir, in the inclusive framework, which is part of the OECD, this piece of legislation allows the Barbados Revenue Authority, sir, to be in a position to exchange information, sir, with counterparties across the globe to ensure that we can focus on where profits are being generated, the level of taxation, sir, that will be paid in the various jurisdictions. Members of the public would be aware that just a few weeks ago there was an agreement for a minimum global tax rate of 15%, sir, which effectively, sir, applies to these types of companies with these thresholds, because it is important that we understand that in a dynamic environment, sir, and still very changing environment, that even in the context of where we are seeing further innovations within the context of the digital space and the engagement of companies, especially, sir, some of the tech companies that are really, sir, gaining in tremendous value in the context of the market, you will recognize, sir, that whereas 20 years ago it would have been manufacturing and logistics companies, sir, that were the largest companies, perhaps even energy companies, sir, were the largest size companies globally. Today, you have a situation where IT firms, fintech firms, sir, now constitute, sir, across the world, the highest value companies globally, and the extent to which, sir, whether it is the design of the products is maybe done in one jurisdiction, the sale and assembly of whatever the physical goods and services that may come to that are done in another. It is important to be able to track and understand, sir, that where profits are generated, that you would appreciate that tax authorities want to ensure that the appropriate tax is paid in the appropriate jurisdiction, such that we are not blindsided, sir, by the fact that we may have a bilateral treaty with a specific country and ignoring the fact that the very entity, sir, may be operating in 4 or 5 different jurisdictions, and that you're only seeing from a bilateral perspective where where profits may be emanating. And by way of simple example, sir, let's suppose, sir, that, and I will, just for ease of reference, sir, assume that I'll make the assumption that each of our constituencies, sir, are countries, separate and distinct, just for, by way of example, sir. And let's say, sir, that there's a company in St. Michael Central who is producing a particular good, sir. The company has another subsidiary, sir, in Christchurch West, sir. And your company, the company in your jurisdiction, sir, produces a set of goods for $100, sells to the subsidiary, sir, in Christchurch West for $100. But then the company at Christchurch West, sir, sells to the company in St. Michael North, sir, for $300. So if you track the transaction, sir, there's no profit generated in St. Michael Central. And therefore the tax authorities in St. Michael Central, sir, seeing the activity of the entity there, realizes, no, well, there's no profits being generated and therefore no tax. But of course, if you're exchanging information across the chain, then you can track to see where the profits go. So, as I said, the company, the subsidiary in Christchurch West, sir, sells to the other subsidiary in St. Michael North, and all of a sudden, sir, there's a huge profit. And not to single out the member for St. Michael North, but given that the convergence emanated with him, sir, in the context of where we were, given that St. Michael North may be a lower tax jurisdiction than yours, sir, then you would appreciate that the tax rate that the company in St. Michael North will pay by way of taxation given the profit would be lower relative to the fact that the transaction, sir, and the value of the transaction that took place would ordinarily attract. And therefore, it wouldn't be fair, sir, for those companies that are related, and this is important, because there's a relationship. Because if you happen to be selling to the company in St. Michael West, sir, you will not sell the same goods to the company in St. Michael West at the same price that you sold the company in Christchurch West. And therefore, because of the nature of that relationship that exists, it certainly would be unfair, sir, for the taxpayers in St. Michael Central to not be able to benefit from the fact that there's profits within that context, sir, to be able to give to your citizens. And therefore, what we are trying to establish here globally, of which Barbados is participating effectively, sir, is to allow for the tax authority in St. Michael Central, sir, and the tax authority in St. Michael in Christchurch West, and the tax authority in St. Michael North, and any other that may be in the chain, sir, to be able to track the profits and to be able to say, well, based on what I see there, based on the relationship, then the tax authority in St. Michael Central, sir, will be able to say, well, a piece of that $200 in profit really belonged to me, because the relationship that exists between said entities means that deliberately the products were sold at a price, sir, that influence the profit, because as I indicated to you, sir, if the company in St. Michael Central was selling to the company in St. Michael West at a different price, then obviously that arm's length transaction means then, sir, that there really ought to be the tax from that process ought to come back to you, sir, in the matter of equity. And therefore, the sale price to the member for St. Michael, the constituency of St. Michael West, sir, may have been $150. And therefore, the same company executing the same transaction with an unrelated party, sir, generates a $50 profit, and therefore, it is the tax on that $50 effectively, sir, that will come that should come with respect to your jurisdiction. And this is effectively at the simplest level, sir, so that citizens appreciate that as we operate in a global environment, sir, that is, again, sir, becoming very complex, because there may be some instances where things are sold at a loss, sir, deliberately, depending on circumstances, our inventory is running out, and people make decisions on these types of things. So it is not as simple as I've explained it, sir, but I hope that people get the concept within that we are trying to explain here, because tax authorities, people are transacting business, sir, every day, all now. Transactions are being executed in real time, all now. And tax authorities, effectively, sir, are always playing catch up in a real sense, because it is only when the entity in St. Michael Central, sir, files a corporation tax, which is once a year, effectively. You may prepay and do these things periodically, but when you file your corporation tax return, sir, the entity in St. Michael Central, sorry, it is really only at that point, sir, that the examination of all of this then takes place. So what is being intended, sir, is globally, and I know, sir, that some persons out there might be tempted to think that it is some type of big brother, some type of big brother system that is trying to look into people's business. But effectively, sir, I don't necessarily perceive it as that, because at the end of the day, sir, fairness in terms of where taxes are paid and the quantum, I think is important. And therefore, jurisdictions have to, well, it is in the interest of jurisdictions to, I believe, to cooperate and have rules within which to exchange the said information, so that there is order to the process, there's order and a sense of fairness and equity, sir, because as you know, sir, these days, corporations are getting more and more powerful, sir, more and more powerful, and it requires, sir, the corporations of governments internationally to be able to provide a barrier, sir, or some level of defense with respect to the protection of citizens and their rights, sir. And therefore, whilst I know a number of persons may not like the notion of paying taxes, but the truth is, sir, taxes is what allows for a lot of things to happen in the space that would not ordinarily happen. And and the reality is that if you are living in a modern democracy and you want to continue to benefit from, in a sense, sir, what the systems, for systems to be orderly, sir, it means that there is a level of tax fairness and tax equity, sir, that must apply. And the truth is, the larger these entities become, the more powerful, sir, they can become by their market power. And whilst taxation is only a small, well, a relatively small facet of the order of regulation, because issues in relation to the protection of consumer rights, certain and environmental rights, and other rights, sir, are important. I believe that this forms a critical part of how we can protect the certain citizens of Barbados going forward as part of a collective set of work that internationally only responsible governments will seek to pursue. And Barbados has a responsible government, sir, and it is our mission to, as I said, sir, not just to participate in this process, but to put ourselves in a position, sir, to pivot and use a number of these key pieces of legislation as a tool, sir, to promote Barbados, promote the interests of Barbadian businesses, to be able to expand and give more opportunities, sir, to young people to as we bring new and diverse businesses into the space, sir, to provide an environment where a number of our young people can work for global companies right here in Barbados. And the extent to which our welcome stamp, sir, has been successful, it certainly has demonstrated, sir, that once we can change our mental, once we can change the mindset, sir, with respect to how we approach the business or doing business in Barbados and doing business with strategic partners, I believe that we can turn what has become, in the public's eye, some kind of regulatory burden. I think we can turn that into a real opportunity, sir, for a lot of people in this country. But we must keep abreast, sir, with the fact that times are changing, the technology is changing at a pace, sir, that it is rapid, and we must be able to keep up. And the reality is that tax authorities working together is one mechanism of allowing us to keep up, at least as it relates to regulations. But I think as we pivot, certainly in terms of being able to attract new investment to Barbados, I believe that the areas that we've highlighted within the context of certainly the maritime space, within the context of the life science space, or even within the context of agriculture and other areas, that the visioning that we have articulated, sir, with respect to a number of these areas, we have been putting in place, sir, the framework that allows us to be able to get it executed, sir. And I am hopeful that once the pandemic, sir, can abate sufficiently, that the resumption of what I may refer to as normal service, sir, that we can see the acceleration of the implementation of a number of these very key initiatives. So the bill, sir, is an important one in the context of how we intend to build out and broaden not just the regulatory framework, but as I said, in the context of being able to provide opportunities for Barbadians going forward. Now, sir, the the bill speaks to the multinational enterprises, sir. And I made reference to that by way of example in the example that I give. But the M&E group, sir, and I just wanted to, just for the clarity of the chamber, speaks to, includes 2 or more enterprises, sir, for which the tax residents of the enterprises are in different jurisdictions. And I gave that example by way of the fact that you may have a group of companies operating in different jurisdictions and are able, sir, to do effectively what is referred to transfer pricing. And the impact that transfer pricing, as it described in that example, sir, has on the determination of what level of taxation should be applied. And therefore, sir, as you may have had in the example that I give, if the tax authority in St. Michael Central, sir, did not have an arrangement to exchange information with Christchurch West and subsequently St. Michael North, then you would never know, sir, that, I say you, but in the context of the example, you as representing the tax authority because we are all representative of tax authorities in here this morning, sir. You as a representative of the tax authority for St. Michael Central would not know that there's potential revenue for you to be able to collect on the basis of the fact that you're not participating in this exchange of information. Whereas you may have had a bilateral treaty that you routinely exchange between yourself and St. Michael West. After all, you're right next door. And therefore, the ease with which you may be able to attract your taxes from that side, you may be comfortable with without realizing that you're escaping that was being lost to you through not participating in that dynamic exchange of information or the framework for exchange of information. Then it means that the residents in St. Michael Central, sir, may not be benefiting in the way that they ought to, given the nature of the transaction. So it is important that is made clear. Says an enterprise that is resident for tax purposes in one jurisdiction and is subject to tax with respect to the business carried out through a permanent establishment in another jurisdiction. And then it says B is not included in the M&E group. But as I referred to, sir, earlier, if you're making less than $850 million US dollars during any fiscal year, you're excluded from this requirement to be able to shift. Now, the truth is, sir, that even in the context of and this is relevant in the context of global taxation, but within our own domestic space, sir, as you well know, we have companies in Barbados and certainly across the region that operate regionally. And therefore, within the context of CARICOM, whilst there may not be many companies that will reach this particular threshold, it is important, certainly within the context of Barbados operating in a CSME and having companies that effectively, sir, have the capacity to do the same thing at what may be regarded as a lower level, only because of the quantum, that obviously tax authorities will be able to exchange information. So whilst there is a requirement specifically if you're above that threshold, sir, if you're above that threshold, it is required that these things are exchanged to assure that that is not done. By us participating in this thing, sir, it allows us to be able to inquire with our other tax authorities in the context of the region, given that we do have companies that operate across the region, to ensure that we too are able to monitor and track and understand the nature of the business. Because don't fool yourself, sir, whilst the example I gave you is related to countries, potentially, internationally, and as we all know, sir, that I do not know that any Samsung or iPhone or anything, well, not Samsung, Samsung is Korean. There's no apple, sir, that is made in the United States. Because if it was made in the United States, the apple probably would cost $1 million. But the reality is, parts are assembled, sir, made and assembled using the global supply chain. And because of the nature of that, the extent to which, obviously, if you think about that process, that it is a very complicated one. Because the chips may be manufactured maybe in India, sir. The screens might be manufactured in Bangladesh. The battery might be manufactured in Philippines, sir, or wherever. They're assembled and shipped to, well, they're shipped globally. So they're not shipped just to the United States, they're shipped globally because, as you are aware, sir, whether it's a iPad or iPhone or Samsung, Galaxy, or any of these smartphones, sir, they are shipped globally. And they're shipped globally, as you would appreciate, sir, through entities that if you think about if you can think about the spider web, sir, of all of this, it starts to get very, 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 very complicated. And therefore, where the taxes are levied certainly is important, because as you would appreciate, sir, often where a lot of the work is done, the taxes don't necessarily reach in the way that they ought to. And we all know and have heard of, we have been, sorry, let me rephrase, sir, let me rephrase. When we converted, sir, we were accused of being a lower tax jurisdiction. We trying to encourage people to hide money and all kinds of things, sir. But the truth is, sir, when you reflect on the effective tax rates globally, when you really reflect on it, sir, there are some jurisdictions that will say to you, my tax rate is 30%. But the number of loopholes and allowances and all the things, sir, by the time you get to what is actually paid in the context from a company, you realize that effectively, sir, it is next to nothing. Because the tax code is so complicated, that you start at this number, which you said, this is my tax rate. But as you would understand, sir, when companies get large, and it's only really truly large companies, sir, that really benefit from complicated tax codes. And therefore, the assertion that countries like Barbados, yes, we have a low tax. We are a low tax jurisdiction. But a low tax jurisdiction in the context, sir, that when you reflect on the kinds of things that companies will be able to claim, sir, against the operating profit, the truth is, sir, that it really made little sense to say that you're going to exempt 200 or 300 different line items, sir, that effectively makes a mockery of the headline tax rate, which is advertised. And for us, simplifying the tax code and bringing a clear, sensible approach, sir, with respect to taxation could only make sense for a jurisdiction like Barbados, because, sir, one, we don't have the capacity, sir, to be going to checking up on all these to verify, sir, that you spend the thing in the right thing to make sure that the allowance that you're claiming is the right allowance. Because when you start to realize, sir, that an economy that is evolving, and don't get me wrong, I'm not suggesting that it is impossible from an accounting perspective to do the appropriate validations. But after a while, you must ask yourself, sir, what is the tax authority? How are you going to deploy the resources of the tax authority to do effectively, sir, to be able to help build out and encourage a process of investment? And therefore, what this government certainly is intending to do, sir, is, yes, BRA, sir, and I say so without apology, the BRA and the customs and every other entity that may collect revenue on behalf of all of our citizens, sir, because they're not doing it for any other purpose than to benefit our citizens. That whilst they have a responsibility, sir, to collect, we want to pivot and allow them to start focusing not just on the collection, sir, but certainly on how do we facilitate, sir, the expansion of business so that we start to use our regulations, sir, as a competitive edge. And using our regulations as a competitive edge, sir, I believe is important because as much as, again, I know people don't like to hear about the tax man, if the government, sir, is not aware as to what is going on within a specific sector, then it means that your policy, sir, is lopsided. There's asymmetric information. We then have to guess at what is happening, and it makes no sense for anybody to have to guess, sir, what is happening within a space if we can create a framework, that allows for us to properly set up policy and to be able to implement said policy in a manner that makes sense for everybody. And so these M&E groups, sir, are quite large, and they are growing because the number of billionaires, sir, every day there's a new billionaire, and that billionaire, sir, has a network of companies that, and there's nothing wrong. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with being a billionaire. So just for the avoidance of any doubt, sir. But the reality is, global business is becoming more complicated. And our participation in as part of a set of international accounting principles, I think, is important, because I would like to believe, sir, that Barbadians would like its government to be able to collect as much revenue as it could possibly collect, sir, in order to help improve the delivery of the public services that we have agreed as a government ought to be available to citizens. And therefore, the extent to which our standard of living, sir, relies on us being able to track down as much revenue as we can to properly deploy, sir, to provide the said public goods and public services, I think is a noble thing. And therefore, we must keep up, sir, as regulators, with what is happening globally. And this is part, sir, of the process of being able to do that. And there is, and I will speak very briefly, sir, on a tangential matter, because it is important that we understand the reporting procedures and the extent to which those procedures, will be relevant here. Now, sir, one of the things that we have found as part as we have been reviewing these processes, sir, and as you know, sir, from time to time you would hear about, or you may have heard, sir, about the Panama Papers. You probably heard, sir, about the Pandora Papers, sir, and there's all kinds of papers that are out there, sir, that really and truly, sir, in the absence of the right information, can portray or convey the wrong message, because very often, as you know, in our jurisdiction, sir, and I make this reference because people set up companies, and very often, sir, there's no trading activity taking place. And certainly, when the last administration, sir, introduced the filing requirement for in relation to KIPO, they never really did any real sensitization, sir. They never bothered, sir, to let the people know or understand, sir, the context in which these things were being done. And they slapped this $10 fee, sir, per day on people just willy-nilly, sir, and without the appropriate information to help people to appreciate, sir, that as we are moving into a modern framework for reporting, that you really have to make sure that there's a focus on compliance, and compliance without necessarily making people feel as if, sir, they are criminals. And the extent to which, sir, I know that there are a number of entities that have been registered for years, sir, never traded or anything, but with those amendments made by the last government, sir, when we were in the process of reviewing the difference between, sir, and I made reference to the Pandora Papers and the Panama Papers from this perspective, that if you look at the number of companies that are registered at CAIPO, sir, versus the number of companies that are registered for corporate, with the Revenue Authority to file corporation taxes, you realize that there's a difference between, there are more companies registered at CAIPO than more companies registered with the BRA, sir, to file corporation tax. So, if you're looking at it from the outside, sir, not understanding the nature of how persons in Barbados may set up a company, some people have died. Some people never actually took any action to trade. And as the BRA, sir, as you will know, with the introduction of TAMIS and everything that's happened over the years, if you're not trading, sir, a company, then in your mind, sir, there's no requirement for you to file any taxes, because if the company is not doing any business, then there's nothing to file. But one of the things that, as part of this to bring greater order to the process, is that for jurisdictions to be perceived as well ordered and having a good business climate, sir, it is important that, and there is a process obviously for being able to either be struck off of the register or to actually dissolve the company, which as you're familiar with, sir. But the truth is, sir, a number of people set up their businesses and, their registrations, and life happens. Some people gone away, forgot about it. People just, business stopped, whatever. And so there's a discrepancy. So closing that discrepancy has meant, sir, that we've had to administratively go through and make sure that, one, we understand who is not trading, so that any reporting that we do actually represents reality, as opposed to somebody, as you know, sir, whether these days people hack and do all kinds of things. And next thing you know, you see some set of papers out, the Bridgestone papers or something, that will say that there are these companies in Barbados set up and they're filing taxes. When in truth, in fact, sir, the reason they're filing taxes is because they're not operating. And therefore, between the Revenue Authority and CAIPO, they've been working from an administrative perspective to clean that up, so that persons who may have forgotten, and some persons may have received some correspondence already, and all that is required, sir, is to submit an affidavit certifying that you haven't been operating. You have to get struck off the register. There's no requirement to file with BRA, and everything is cool. So that as we are making an effort, sir, to, from an administrative perspective, be able to clearly articulate what is happening in Barbados, because you would accept, sir, that someone landing and going to the corporate registry and say, how many companies you have registered how many companies are registered, and they give you a number, sir, and then you go to the tax authority and you ask how many companies you have registered for corporation tax, and the number that they have, sir, is maybe 3/4 of the number that you have is registered. Then immediately it starts to kind of, you ask yourself, well, what's going on here? So as not to have any Bridgestone papers or Spikestone papers or any wherever papers that they may have, sir, we have been embarking on a process to regularize that. And therefore, I say through you, sir, to persons who may have received such correspondence, that they need not fear, They're just required to do the affidavit once you've not been trading. And sir, the truth is, I am one of those entities, because since coming into this space, sir, my company hasn't traded. And I say so publicly because, sir, I've seen some stuff circulating on social media, and that is quite disappointing. But my company certainly has not been trading since 2017. And I too have to certify that I have not been trading. And therefore, as people respond to this. I encourage them to respond to both the registrar and the BRA, because then it allows us to be able to from an administrative perspective, just separate and clean up in effect what the true records are on both registers, so that we can so that between the CAIPO and the Barbados Revenue Authority, that we can present a clearer picture as to what is taking place in Barbados in relation to these matters. Sir, the reporting procedures, sir, at part 2, sorry, are spelled out. The minister responsible for finance, sir, is the competent authority. Obviously, those functions can be delegated, as is usually the case. And in this instance, once this legislation is passed, the Revenue Authority obviously will be delegated that specific function, because since 2017, there have been, through some of the bilateral arrangements, exchanging information with countries that they have, sorry, excuse me, exchanging information with entities that there is an agreement with already, but obviously we want to be able to expand that and make sure that we are going in the right direction. Each ultimate parent entity, sir, of an M&E group which is resident for tax purposes in Barbados shall file a country-by-country report. And therefore, sir, the example that he gave you is that if the entity is headquartered in St. Michael Central, sir, for tax purposes, which they would be because they're making something, then they have to give a country-by-country report with respect to where they have sent stuff to. Of course, this is the threshold, as I said, above $850 million US dollars, in order to be able to make sure that we are clear with respect to that. Notwithstanding subsection 1, sir, a constituent entity which is not an ultimate parent entity or is resident for tax purposes shall also file the tax report in relation to the matter. Because as you would appreciate, sir, as I told you, thank you very much, thank you. As I told you, you may find that some subsidiaries, sir, may very well be larger than the head. It may sound strange, but it is possible, just by the nature of the structure of the entity. And therefore, it is important that we appreciate that the nature of the transactions and the size of the business requires that the requirement to file is there. And I think that as we do this and as things become more and more complicated, that this is a space that will have to be carefully monitored so that we can report progress in relation to the entity. The notification, sir, of the competent authority, any constituent entity of an M&E group that is resident for tax purposes in Barbados shall, where applicable, notify the competent authority whether it is the ultimate parent entity or a surrogate parent entity of the M&E group, no later than the last day of the reporting fiscal year of that M&E group. And as you know, sir, companies have different timings for their fiscal years. As a matter of fact, sir, it often, what the Honourable Member for St. Michael North perhaps didn't realize when he triggered the convergence was that we really had that initial transition, sir, meant that depending on which company's income year fell in a particular month, sir, there was a whole set of transition in timing, because when the legislation came into effect, some companies were already in the middle of their fiscal year, and therefore we had to make adjustments for activity that happened before, activity that happened after, and therefore these tax matters, sir, are often not as straightforward as they might appear from an accounting perspective. But I'm happy that we were able to complete it, not this, in spite of the fact that the Honourable Member was quite efficient But then on our side, sir, we had to respond and accommodate said efficiency, which he's always known for. But the truth is, sir, that tax matters, depending on the income year of the company, meaning, sir, the date at which those companies will determine their financial year. So, for example, as you know, sir, April 1st of any given year to March 31st of the next year is government's fiscal year. And therefore, while some companies may use the calendar year as January to December as their financial year, they're free to obviously determine their start and end. And all of those are things that come into the consideration. And therefore, as we move forward with this process, it is intended, sir, that we will be in a position to start to receive and exchange information from once this legislation is passed, from as early as the beginning of next year, which then obviously allows Barbados to close out one element of what was required of us to be able to satisfy, and to make sure then that we can start leveraging the regulations in the way that we intend to do. Verification of enterprises, sir, and clause 8, and I raise it in this context because as it's clear here, sir, it says the registrar, meaning the registrar of CAIPO, shall forward to the commissioner at least once every 6 months a list of entities registered under the Companies Act, Registration of Business Names Act, sir, and the society with restricted liability and other information which the commissioner may require for the purpose of the act. And the reason for that, sir, is that this is not just for that regulatory reporting purpose, but as I had mentioned earlier, sir, just to make sure that we have a mechanism to track and report and to allow people to organize their affairs, that the greater collaboration between the Corporate Affairs and the Intellectual Property Office and the Barbados Revenue Authority would allow then for there to keep the register as clean as possible, so that you don't have this buildup of entities, sir, over time that may be registered with CAIPO, but not with BRA, and allow us then to have these issues abated, because my office, sir, has received no end of requests, not just in relation to the filing requirements, but certainly as it's come in with respect to these companies that really, sir, some of them ought to be dissolved. As you know, there's a process for dissolution, but at least at the minimum struck off from the register. I say to persons, you just decide what it is you want to do, and let's clean up the register and make sure that we are all on the same page. But the reality is, sir, that no company can come to Barbados of that size, you wouldn't expect, and register with CAIPO and not register with the Revenue Authority. And therefore, just to make sure that there is that exchange of information, at least internally, that this provision is here just to make sure that the verification of those enterprises that will qualify is there, and we're in a position then to effect the exchange of information. As you know, sir, the records and use of country reports, sir, these are basically the information that you would expect reporting entities to be able to provide to the tax authority, because the example that I use with St. Michael Central and the other constituency who may be regarded as tax jurisdictions, you would expect, sir, that the entities operating within that space that meet the threshold would be able to report to the relevant tax authorities that this is the activity that has taken place, such that collectively, sir, you can determine whether or not profits have been shifted from one jurisdiction to the next at the expense, sir, of taxpayers in one jurisdiction versus another on the basis of the activity. And it is a lot of work, and I'm not gonna lie to you, sir, it is a lot of work, and that is why the Revenue Authority has been investing in building out its data warehouse, because as we have been modernizing, and certainly some of the service providers on the accounting space have been also modernizing. I know that this kind of activity is going to require a lot of data and data mining, which is going to be important for us to be able to track and validate that the information provided obviously makes sense in the context of the process. The appointment of agents, sir, which, as you know, companies generally will have some type of either lawyer or accounting firm to act on their behalf to do these things. But of course, as you know, sir, whilst you may be my lawyer acting on my behalf, I am still responsible for whatever actions I take. And therefore, whilst you may have the responsibility I may defer to you to file on my behalf, it is really my responsibility as the entity to do the appropriate filing. Confidentiality, sir, and use of information is outlined at 11, and as you would appreciate that, the truth is, sir, that companies globally do tend to, companies of this ilk, I should say, of this size, I should say, normally will do quarterly reports to investors, sir. They publish their quarterly returns. People scrutinize those quarterly returns, and therefore, one would expect that, yes, whilst there's adherence with respect to confidentiality, one would expect that the information that is published by an entity and what is submitted to a tax authority, that they would add up. And therefore, the extent to which, obviously, one would, as a tax agency, the treatment of, or the treatment with which taxpayers' data is confidential, obviously, is assured. However, what this does is that, obviously, if there is a request, sir, from a jurisdiction within the context of the inclusive framework and the automatic exchange of information framework, that whilst the information is confidential, that obviously the purpose for which they're to be used is outlined in the Multilateral Competent Authorities Agreement in the Exchange of Country by Country Report 2016, which is part of what we have already agreed to. And where the competent authority receives a country-by-country report, it shall preserve the confidentiality of the information in the report to the extent as if the report was provided to it in accordance with the same convention, sir, and amended the protocol in 2010. So the purpose is just, of course, sir, to verify that what has been submitted to you makes sense, because if we are saying that there's what is presented to the tax authority in a specific jurisdiction and filing to you, and they are required to do those reports, which are validated obviously by the counterparty, the other tax competent authority in the other jurisdiction, then obviously all the information effectively, sir, should be the same, given that I assume that companies will in the point of whether the agents or is being done internally, will obviously supply the appropriate information to the tax authorities. Part 4, sir, speaks to offenses and the usual penalties that may apply, sir, if you provide false reports or you tamper with a report, sir. Some people, and I take this opportunity only in this context, sir, since it speaks to tampering, I'll use this example because of some activities that have come to our attention. As you know, sir, and just very quickly, just with your permission, as part of the modernization of customs, as you're aware, sir, we have, and the upgrade to a secure world, we have transitioned to implement a number of reforms, including something called post-clearance audits. And during So whilst goods are being cleared faster and processed using a risk management process, the Customs Department is using this process called post-clearance audit, sir, to validate and verify that the information, sir, that I may have submitted to the Customs Department and what I have paid by way of taxes in the Customs Department is actually true and correct. And through a number of those post-clearance audits has been revealed that some persons, not all, some persons, have submitted information, invoices that have been altered in some instances, sir, which is in effect, sir, tampering the report in the context of what is here, and that was done specifically, sir, to avoid the level of taxes that one would ordinarily have to pay, and therefore I think it is important for the public to appreciate that the provision of information to tax authorities is a very important requirement, and not just the provision of information, but the provision of the right set of information. And therefore, sir, having recognized that that is an issue for some people, as you would appreciate the process, you would expect that having discovered it, the department then obviously would seek to rectify the issue and to recover the said taxes that would be due and owing to the department. So you would imagine, sir, that in this context, with respect to what you are supplying to a tax authority, that if it is found that the information or any report that has been submitted, obviously it has been tampered with based on what the requirements are, then you would appreciate that the penalties as outlined here, but for the person who may have done the tampering with the said report is $10,000. Making a false report, sir, attracts a fine of $50,000 or imprisonment of 10 years or both. In this instance, obstruction of the competent authority. Any person who hinders or obstructs the competent authority from performing a function under that is guilty of an offense, sir, and liable to summary conviction of $10,000 or imprisonment of 1 year or both. And there are pecuniary penalties, sir, up to $10,000 on a relevant enterprise which fails to comply with any of the sections outlined here. So this section obviously gives broadly the fines for any specific offenses that may fall under this act. But the truth is, sir, we would hope that as we roll this out, that the professionals who will be engaged in this process obviously will be that, and therefore this section will not necessarily apply unless there is some type of administrative matter as opposed to actual deliberate tampering with reports or said things. But if persons are desirous, sir, of testing the process, then I won't encourage them, but these provisions are here to be able to prevent such things from happening. Now, this is strictly on the one hand, sir, an administrative function for the Revenue Authority to be able to implement But as I said earlier, the intention, sir, is to be able to make sure that we can turn this regulatory tool into something that can help promote Barbados internationally, and the extent to which, sir, that this country-by-country reporting legislation is here, we believe that the automatic exchange of information web portal, which has been up and live, all this stuff will happen obviously within the context of a digital space, validated obviously by the various tax authorities to exchange, but the reporting requirements, sir, of each entity are quite clear as it relates to the bill here, and therefore we are confident, sir, that once this piece of legislation is enacted, that we would be in a position to as I said, improve the regulatory environment for Barbados in terms of the business climate, that we will be in a position equally, sir, to seek to attract a wider range of businesses, sir, because we would have added to the capability of the jurisdiction to be able to look at issues of transfer pricing. I must say to you, sir, that at some stage during, I hope, the life of this Parliament, we will be able to bring a specific piece of legislation that will address specifically issues related to transfer pricing, as the policy has been settled. It's just now to ensure then that we can get the appropriate legislation drafted in relation to that, which will not just cover matters of an international nature, but certainly not matters within the context of the domestic space, and that we are being guided by the fact that there are entities operating globally. There's the amount of mergers and acquisitions, sir, that still are taking place globally, makes the situation even more complicated, and therefore it is important that in this context that we're able to help build the capacity domestically in order to be able to help improve not just the regulatory environment, but improve the business environment in which we're operating, and then obviously allow us to move to a new level by being able to expand the reach to expand the scope, of the Barbados economy. And so, sir, I am happy to commend this bill to the House this morning. Sir, I don't ever promise to be brief, but I believe that I have been disciplined this morning, sir, in my presentation, and with with those few words, sir, I beg to move that this bill be read a second time. I'm obliged to you.
Honourable for St. Michael North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I joined this debate really to, first of all, to congratulate the Minister on a very, very, as usual, fine and brief presentation. I don't think there's a lot that I can really add to what he said, Mr. Speaker. But what I want to do this morning is to place what we are doing somewhat in context. Because I think that context is always important. And I begin by saying, Mr. Speaker, that at least 7, 8 years ago, some may trace it back to earlier, some international organizations, groupings of countries, including entities like the G20, IMF, OECD, World Bank, UN, even some regional tax organizations, they came together and they took the position that the time had come to look at what they considered to be certain loopholes in the international tax system. And they felt it was necessary to have a look at them because they said that a number of multinational enterprises were exploiting these gaps and loopholes that existed to erode the tax and revenue bases of certain countries and to shift profits away from those countries to countries in which there were citizens or residents. And they felt that that was an abuse of the international tax system. And they decided that the time had come where, of course, you can only operate like that where countries have legislation in place. And in fact, the time had come when a serious look should be taken at that, at this whole issue of base erosion and profit shifting, otherwise known as BEPS, BEPS. And they decided that, therefore, the time had come to institute some, or ensure that there were some anti-BEPS measures instituted in countries across the world. And Mr. Speaker, from the time that decision was made, it really has been, life has not been the same, especially in developing countries like Barbados and other countries. It has basically been like a roller coaster ride that you're constantly on. And in fact, the goalposts keep changing. And quite frankly, Mr. Speaker, sometimes it seems as though you're being shifted to another playing field altogether. Not only that the goalposts are shifting, but you're being put on a different playing field altogether. And these anti-BEPS initiatives took the form, as implemented by the OECD and formulated, of some 15 action items, of which there were 4 minimum standards that countries worldwide had to comply with and to meet these standards. What was outlined today by the minister so ably was only one of the standards that Barbados has to meet. When I came on board in 2018, Mr. Speaker, it wasn't I don't think I was around in 20. Or was I? We might have been around, but not know, you know. When I came on board, Mr. Speaker, in 2018, I was tossed in an ocean, deep waters, having to swim with fish, these big fish, OECD, EU, and so on. Some would say vultures or sharks, really, and seeking really to devour us. The first thing I had to do, however, was to honor a commitment that was given by the last administration to basically dismantle a system or a tax structure we had in place for over 4 decades that had served us very, very well. They gave that commitment, reckless as to whether they were ever going to do it, how they were going to do it, and just before the last elections, they took it to cabinet, literally the same month of elections, and made it a cabinet decision, a policy position, and in effect, threw it on to the successor government to do what it was that they were not, in fact, doing, but had pledged to do. I almost said in the dead of night. So we found ourselves faced with arguments from the OECD that we had preferential tax regimes, meaning that some regimes, whether it was international business companies, societies with restricted liability, offshore banks, they were being given a certain rate of tax to pay that in fact was not the same rate of tax that other domestic companies were being called upon to pay. So some of those entities in the international business arena were being called to pay as low as 0.25% tax, when in fact local companies were being charged some 25%. They said that that was a preferential tax regime, and they took exception to that and said we had to dismantle that. They say that we were ring-fencing the international business sector by allowing them to just operate in Barbados but not do business with any locals or Barbadians at all. So we were in fact ring-fencing them. They took offense at that and said we had to get rid of that as well. Even after we did that, Mr. Speaker, they then said that we needed to enact economic substance legislation. In other words, they said that we had, as I will demonstrate shortly, had converged our tax rate. They said that we needed to ensure that we had legislation to show that companies registered in Barbados, incorporated in Barbados, were in fact carrying on their core income generating activities in Barbados. So we had to enact economic substance. Although, Mr. Speaker, really and truly, Barbados is a country that always really was known for having real companies, not shelf companies, but they insisted they wanted that in a legislative format. So, Mr. Speaker, we had to do that too, and we did that. All that was done. We removed the preferential tax regimes, the ring fencing, passed the economic substance legislation. We came here, as the honourable member said, with some 14 pieces of legislation. I'm actually credited with all 14. But in fact, ironically, Mr. Speaker, the one that the honourable member sort of criticized, the one on convergence, was actually the one that he brought. So So, but Mr. Speaker, we brought 14 pieces of legislation to this Parliament, which take effect effective January 1st, 2019. And we did that because we said, in the words of the Prime Minister, and I agreed 100%, we all agreed, the time had come that we needed to stop dodging bullets and fix the problem once and for all. We decided, therefore, we would converge our tax rates down to a range between 1% at the bottom and 5.5% at the top. So we abolished any distinction between local companies and international business companies. All companies were just domestic companies, business companies, full stop. We went global. All global business was local, all local business was global. That's the route we took. We decided we were going to make our bed in that. We plan our economic future and fortunes based on that, Mr. Speaker. We did that to avoid dodging bullets. Or so we thought. So we thought, Mr. Speaker. That was to comply with Action 5 of the BEPS initiative. But having done that, Mr. Speaker, now and settling down, not quite 3 years after having done so, these same vultures come back again, Mr. Speaker, and decided that now, under the guise of another action of the BEPS initiative, Action 1, entitled Taxation in the Digital Economy, that they were now going to put into international law and requirements that now there will be a minimum global corporate tax of, at first it had at least 15%, but the at least was taken out. So of 15%. So we went in one direction on their urging. They accepted everything we had done was correct, acceptable. And then, like a wolf in the night, Mr. Speaker, they come and tell you, no, you got to do something completely different. You have to know, in effect, accept that all companies doing business now in your international companies, foreign-owned companies, doing business in your jurisdictions now will pay 15% tax. 15%. So if you want to charge 3% or 4%, 1%, they can still pay the other 13, 14, or whatever percent in their own jurisdictions. So that ransacked the whole thing, Mr. Speaker. After bringing 14 pieces of legislation here, 13 plus 1 pieces of legislation here, Mr. Speaker, and structuring your life now along certain expectations based on their agreement, you know, they come back now and tell you, you got to restructure all over again now and play a different ball game. They said that they were trying to stop now a race to the bottom. So everybody, they're saying, was anxious to put a tax structure in place that was low. So although they said, if it is low, you just got to put economic substance legislation in place and that cures that problem. We did that. But now they say that they're stopping the race to the bottom. So no longer can you now compete by going with a lower rate of tax, because no matter what rate of tax you put in place, any foreign-owned company that does business in by you got to pay 15%. Now, that puts countries like ours at risk. Because why is somebody going to decide, I'm going to leave Paris and come into Barbados and set up a company who charging me 3%, but I still got to pay the other 12 back in Paris? So that is the challenge now, that having put blood, sweat, and tears into a 2018 performance, you now find that less than 3 years later is on the table now for you to deal with as well. So work is going on. We countries like Barbados, small countries, have no choice in this matter. We were holding out at first. We paid a price for doing that back in 2019, early 2019. We were with 8 countries that were not set out to be difficult, but we wanted to get some clarification and some details, raise some concerns. The 8 other countries, before we let run good, Mr. Speaker, we heard that they had capitulated or were capitulating. So it would be an idiot to stand up alone again and then find out you alone on a blacklist. So you had to decide, okay, we're going to give in. But we asked one thing. We said, well, some other things too, but the main thing we said, but we need time to do this. We now embark on a new system, this ban a tax regime that was in place for 4 decades. You said it was okay. Now you come back and change things all over again. So give us time. We are a country that we're grappling with the ravages of COVID. We got general economic problems in the country. And you want us now to just so put ourselves at such risk and then tell us that you plan to bring this system into place in 2023. 2 years from now, 1.5 arguably from now. And we said we wanted some more time. They have not yet budged, Mr. Speaker, I have to inform you, from that planned timeline. They have not. So once again, in Barbados now, we have to face the reality that we have to find other methods now. Because we intend, Mr. Speaker, to ensure that Barbados is a financial services center of excellence. That is what we intend to do. We have decided to fight for this sector. This was a sector that was created by the Barbados Labour Party. The likes of the late Tom Adams are the people who really brought this sector into existence. So we are not going to give this up. But it is work all the time, Mr. Speaker. It is a roller coaster ride. Roller coaster ride. Goalposts changing, playing fields changing every day. But at least I can tell you, Mr. Speaker, that despite the odds, we have not rolled over and decided to die. We have not done that. We recognize that we have to fight with all we have. One day, countries in the world that have been affected the same way will decide that it makes sense to come together and fight together. Yep. I will be long gone, Mr. Speaker, as will you be. Our grandchildren will be long gone before that happens. But we have decided we still have to fight, Mr. Speaker. So we in Barbados, we have decided that certain things, luckily, Barbados is more than a tax rate. Luckily. And the times that I have traveled to lead delegations on road shows, be it in Canada, London, wherever I've gone, I have never just marketed Barbados as a tax, as a rate of tax, having a rate of tax. I've always said we have more than that. We have more than that to offer. For instance, Mr. Speaker, in the area of economic substance, now that calls for demonstrating that you are carrying on business in a real sense in Barbados. So you must have real employees, a real structure, and so on. Core income generating activity. And one thing that I've always promoted, and is a fact, is that we have a very highly qualified and trained workforce in Barbados. Barbados has put a lot into the educational advancement of our people. We really have. From primary to tertiary, right through. So people, when they said that to them on various doors, they were actually surprised to hear that. But that is something that we luckily we have been able to sell. So countries that, you have to have economic substance wherever you go. You can't run from it. It's a universal requirement. So Barbados is well placed, Mr. Speaker, to handle that aspect of things. We have as well, and continue to work on, a wide array of treaties. Currently, we have some 40 treaties in place with other countries, double taxation agreements. We have 9 bilateral investment treaties. And I'm happy to say, Mr. Speaker, that we are currently actually preparing a model bilateral investment treaty, which is at a very, in fact, the file should literally be on the way back to me for my consideration and briefing on it, and then to bring to Cabinet. because investors like to operate in countries where there's a bilateral investment treaty to ensure that the investments are safe if all hell should break loose. So we have engaged the services of an expert on it, and our treaty has been actually revised, and the file should be just advised actually that the file may well be on my desk when I get back there this evening or Monday probably, or tomorrow, since we tend to work on Saturdays as well as ministers. So we are doing things, Mr. Speaker. We have 40 treaties in place, 40 direct double taxation agreements, including the CARICOM one. So we are doing well in that regard. In terms, Mr. Speaker, of the ease of doing business. Now, in other words, the international business sector does not exist in a vacuum. There are other things that have to work along with the international business sector. So we've had a lot of complaints about businesses starting up in Barbados. We have that. Now, I have said before on record, Mr. Speaker, and I will say again, a lot of the complaints that people have made about the corporate registry have been unfounded and untrue. Not all. I'm never stand here and tell you that all were untrue. But not all, Mr. Speaker, but quite a few were unfounded and untrue. That's the fact. In fact, when I am showing some of the things that lawyers have submitted and are arguing about, I really wonder if they are really lawyers, Mr. Speaker. I really wonder. I really wonder. And only 2 days ago, the honourable member for Christchurch West, but he's left. No, it's not. Sorry, I shouldn't even be saying that. But a couple of days ago, I remember a member of Christchurch West called me on a matter, messaged me, in fact, on a matter. And I, as usual, contacted the registrar right away, only to be told that the person who filed as director in the matter was in fact removed from the list of directors, obviously by the said company, right, since 2020 February, and there's no filing the document as a director. And telling the honourable for Christchurch West that Kai was saying up on this thing, that the filed it 6 weeks ago, and that Kai was saying up on this thing, and we won't do it at all. When they check, the matter was detected by corporate registry, and they are waiting for the attorney or the clerk who normally will do these things to come back and collect the forms and submit a proper form. But that now had the honourable for Christchurch West harassing me, telling me that corporate affairs sitting down on something for 6 weeks, when in fact it is his lawyer who was sitting down on it for 6 weeks. So these things happening, Mr. Speaker. But having said all that, the fact is, he recognized that the time had come to go digital in terms of the functioning of the corporate registry. And I am happy to report, for those who are not aware, that I think it was 3 weeks ago, corporate registry actually went live with phase 1 of its IT platform. So that now all entities seeking to, persons seeking to incorporate companies or register business names can now do so digitally online, Mr. Speaker. And the process is straight through processing from beginning to end, application name, reservation, right through until the certificate of incorporation is issued by the registrar. All of that now, Mr. Speaker, can be done online, and I've not yet had any complaints. I know that the flow system went down, flow local went down. At least everything else was working. Digital, local, flow regional, and international. It was only flow to operate on the flow local platform that had a problem for a few days. I understand that is to be fixed if it hasn't already been fixed. That's the only thing that I've heard, Mr. Speaker. Apart from that, so far, so good. So we have done now, and we are going to go on to phase 2 early next year. We will have no post-incorporation documents being dealt with through the dissolution of companies. So, action, Mr. Speaker. That is what if you're going to be competing where everybody has to pay 15%, you have to differentiate yourself on the basis other than tax. You have to make yourself different. You got to make yourself competitive. So, in addition to the corporate registry, Mr. Speaker, the International Business Unit is already digitalized in relation to economic substance. Applications now filed electronically with economic substance. And they are now ensuring also that regular applications for licenses will also be filed digitally online, Mr. Speaker, at the International Business Unit. Applications so that you will be able to mine data, supply other government departments with data, pull out enormous notice, all the incorporations, all the applications, the registrations, be able to compare this year and last year. It will be a fantastic system, Mr. Speaker, so that when that is done, I am proud to say that every business that has to set itself up by use of by reference to the Ministry of International Business will in fact be able to do so, Mr. Speaker, digitally and online, Mr. Speaker. I'm happy to say, obviously there are other entities like the FSC and so on that will interface with other regulators, but insofar as you have to deal with the Ministry of International Business, once that issue is sorted out now with the IT platform for the International Business Unit, everything in terms of applications to commence or renew whatever businesses will be able to be done online, Mr. Speaker. Yeah. The issues that I think we still have to work on, of course, will be the other areas where permissions are needed. Town Planning Department, for example, I know the Minister is passionate about it, but truth be told, I'm still getting some information there that suggests to me that more can be done to get applications out a little faster. But Rome was not built in a day. I think we've come a long way, and therefore, again, town planning. Just to show how seriously we are taking it, Mr. Speaker. This whole challenge now being posed by this global minimum corporate tax of 15%. We actually set up a task force. My ministry did, Mr. Speaker, a task force of public and private sector participants and interest groups to ensure, even international as well, who came to Barbados back in, it was I think in October, and a retreat was done where the entire international business sector now in Barbados was looked at, the entire sector. How should we know, how are we supposed to go forward? Is there any way we can enhance existing products? What new products can we bring on board to ensure that we can continue with a sector that has served us very well through the years but now finds itself under the hammer? Mr. Speaker, so we are taking it very, very seriously. As I said, the Minister really has done an excellent job in terms of all that he said, but I felt that it was necessary for me today, in those brief moments just now, to give some context so you can understand that as he presented, Mr. Speaker, he presented in a way that would not reveal the underlying challenges and so on that we are facing. But this has not been an easy ride. If I may make a suggestion through you, Mr. Speaker, to the Prime Minister, I would just want to suggest that I believe that the Ministry of International Business should be a standalone ministry. It really should be it is a full-time thing. Every minute there's an issue, whether it's the OECD or the European Union. And so, Mr. Speaker, I would just like to say that through you, I'm sure that you will be able to get her ear so that you can recommend that. But, Mr. Speaker, all said and done, Mr. Speaker, I think that the Minister is doing an excellent job. I think the sector still has serious viability, and we intend to do all that we can to ensure that it is in fact shored up, saved and prosperous, Mr. Speaker. With those remarks, sir, I'm indebted to you.
Honourable for Christchurch Central.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. It is hard to follow the Honourable Sir Michael North, particularly when he's been around since 1918. as you as you read. But seriously, sir, the honourable member touched on some matters that are very, very, very important to provide the broader context, because Barbadians may not be always aware of the environment in which we operate in. And the truth is, Mr. Speaker, as you know, when you are in the Moses, in the sea is always rough. And Barbados being a country that aspires, sir, to do right by its citizens and to advocate, certainly on the behalf of not just our citizens, but certainly in effect, strong advocacy for other small island developing states. The reality is that we continue to face challenges on multiple fronts, which is why our ability to be as nimble as possible, sir, and to build as much capacity within the framework that we have is absolutely critical. And that's why I believe, sir, that as much as this has reinforced the point that working together across agencies will be critical, sir, for providing that broader framework of capacity. Because the truth is, sir, the Revenue Authority can't do it on its own. CAIPO can't do it on its own, specifically in the context of the limited resources that we have. And therefore, I know that the number of reforms that we've been putting in place, and I know certainly across the agencies that monitor and regulate this space, we do have a standing working technical committee to stay on top of these issues and to utilize the breadth and experience of all our public officers. So whilst the Revenue Authority is the agency that will be delegated the competent authority for this specific matter, we will do so, sir, in the context of being able to ensure that in whatever international fora that we have to operate in, that Barbados can always present its best foot forward, because that is what is required in order to be able to advocate for change. And the honourable member spoke to the fact that the OECD hasn't budged in relation to the timelines. And the truth is, sir, as you know, this COVID-19 pandemic has been particularly devastating for small island and developing states who depend on international travel and certainly who depend on the global supply chain to be able to not just survive, but even in the context of being able for business to grow. And we will not rest at all. I made an intervention in a meeting a few weeks ago, and I believe that, as the honourable member alluded to, there are some countries out there that once we can establish, I think, more direct relations with, that there is a willing coalition to be able to deal with these issues long term. How effective that coalition will be depends on, sir, how, I suppose, politically countries are prepared to respond, because a lot of it is political, and the extent to which, as the honourable member referred to, countries can be picked off one by one when you don't stand for principle. And we will continue to advocate, because we feel, sir, that, quite frankly, in the context of a pandemic that has significantly impacted our capacity to generate the kind of revenue that we were accustomed to, and the honourable member is correct, we were in the process of reforming and getting back to some sense of stability before COVID hit. And of course, the G20 countries and all those other rich countries have been able to print money and finance their way out of this pandemic in a way that certainly we, not just Barbados, but in our neck of the woods, can't. And they have no perspective. They don't share the same perspective with respect to the impact that these measures will have on us. But, sir, in spite of that, we must resolve, and we have resolved, that no matter how rough the sea is, sir, in this little Moses called Barbados, we will chart our path. And in charting our path, we will continue to engage, not just for the international advocacy, but we will create the space for us to be able to be as nimble as possible. And therefore, whilst the goalposts may shift, we're just going to make sure that we score some goals along the way and make sure that we always either aim for the center, sir, as you know. So even if the post shift, you might still get a ricochet into the back of the net, sir. Because at the end of the day, we must continue to push forward and not remain stagnant. And the extent to which there are very strong winds internationally, and I say to Barbadians that our capacity to implement reforms of a technological nature, reforms of a structural nature, reforms in the way that we process and do things, sir, will make a difference. It will make a difference, because if we can spend more time, sir, on productive things as opposed to administrative things, sir, spend more time both within the context of in this case, the context of the BRA, and I'm sure in the other members' case, for St. Michael North, in the context of CAIPO, actually transitioning to provide greater business intelligence for the business community rather than just focusing on how quickly, and I'm happy that certainly you can do all these things online. But the converse of that is that CAIPO now needs to further transform itself and be that provider of business intelligence for Barbados, and perhaps even the rest of the Caribbean, because that too, sir, is part of what will help to broaden and build out business opportunities in the sub-region, but certainly for Barbados. And therefore, I don't want anybody to think that the ability just to be able to form a company online in minutes is the be-all and end-all. There's a whole lot more that will come from the modernization effort, certainly of CAIPO, and I think that we need to leverage that. And equally, in the context that we are in a situation where we want to broaden and diversify the economy, that we have to make sure that we continue to implement reforms, sir, do it quickly. As the Honourable Member told you, 13 plus 1, and he reminded me that the plus 1 is at me. But the reality is, sir, that we have never resiled from the fact that governing this country requires decisive leadership. And certainly, I know that the Honourable Member has brought a level of energy to this process. And the truth is, sir, I can't curse like how he curses, because I'm yet young, and I say so, sir, in the context that the Honourable Member has been very full-throated, with respect to the fact that these issues continue to plague small and developing states, and the indifference that is certainly shown to the vulnerabilities, sir, that we have been facing. And the truth is, sir, as you know, the last 21 months, certainly for us, and certainly the globe, but certainly for us, certainly has been quite challenging. And in our representations to the fact that this is not just an issue of taxation, this is actually an issue of how do we actually provide the kind of quality healthcare and development trajectory for our citizens that requires certainty in terms of how we are able to tax plan, and therefore the extent to which we can resolve to make this work means that we have ultimately to be able to chart our own course. But in charting that course, recognizing that Barbadians must, as a matter of course, resolve to work with each other but equally resolved to work with other strategic partners in order to help to fend off, sir, any of these specific attacks that may come our way, but not just attacks in that sense, but recognize that the journey is not going to be smooth, sir, and that along the way there will be a few spills and few bumps in our road. But with a bump, sir, you rise up a little bit. You may be a little bit of discomfort, but you get over the bump, sir. And in getting over the bump, it demonstrates that you can handle it, sir. And I believe that that speaks to the very resilience, sir, that we want to build and encourage, inculcate in ordinary Barbadians, because as you know, sir, nobody owes Barbados a living. Nobody owes you or I a living, sir. Nobody owes anybody in Barbados at all a living, and therefore we must work collaboratively, collectively, to forge a path that allows any young person in this country and any person in this country, sir, to be able to take advantage of the opportunities that present themselves globally, and to recognize that I would love to see the day that there is a local company, sir. I would love to see the day that there's a local company that will be exchanging information with tax agents under this regime. Because it will mean, sir, that the capacity of Barbados, of business in Barbados will reach such a level that we too, sir, can leverage the global supply chain. That we too, just like Apple and Amazon and all these people, that we can develop substantive companies right here in Barbados, not only employing Barbadians, but certainly employing persons from across the region, persons from Africa even, sir, such that we can, from this very small space, have a number of companies that reaches this threshold, because we have been able to solve, sir, some of those critical issues that we know have been confronting smaller and developing states. And that what that would mean is that the opportunities for investment of ordinary Barbadians and to be able to get a return on that investment, I think would be realized and substantial. But the only way that we can get to that space, sir, is by being able to open up and embrace challenges as they arise, because with every challenge, sir, there's an opportunity, and we feel that in that context, we would be able to generate real wealth for generations to come. But with this, sir, we are satisfied that we are on the right track. We will continue to advocate on behalf of ordinary Barbadians, and to the extent that we are in a space where I know it's coming up to Christmas and people don't want to hear about taxes, but this is still part of the work of the government, sir. And we are happy that we have developed some capacity within this space to so do, and we hope that with the appropriate legislative framework in place, that leveraging this piece of legislation as a regulatory tool to help build out the rest of the economy will allow us to be able to have more opportunities for Barbadians, have more business being executed from Barbados, and being able to help bring a level of economic stability that certainly COVID-19, sir, has had a significant impact on us up until now. And so, sir, I am happy to commend this bill to the chamber, and with those very, very few words, sir, I beg to move that this bill be read a second time.
Question is that this bill be read a second time. All those honorable members in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Me think the ayes have it. Honorable Leader, Government Business.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I beg to move, sir, with your leave, that the Honourable Member for St. George North be appointed temporary chairman of committees.
Question is that the honorable member for St. George North be appointed temporary chairman of committees. All those honorable members in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. We think the ayes have it.
Sorry, Mr. Speaker. I beg to move that we do not leave the chair and the House resolve itself into committee for further consideration of this bill. My apology.
The question is that the Speaker do not leave the chair and the House resolve itself into committee for further consideration of this bill. All those honourable members in favour, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Me think the ayes have it.
Committee is now in session.
Madam Chair, we're seeking permission to call the bill in parts. Part 1, clauses 1 and 2.
Madam Chair, I beg to move that Part 1, Clause 1 and 2 stand part.
Question is that Part 1 and 2 stand part. Part 1, clauses 1 and 2 stand part. All honourable members in favour, please say aye. All honourable members against, please say nay. Methinks the ayes have it.
Part 2, clauses 3 to 8.
Madam Chair, I beg to move that Part 2, Clauses 3 to 8 stand part.
Question is that Part 2, clauses 3 to 8 stand part. All honourable members in favour, please say aye. All honourable members against, please say nay. Methinks the ayes have it.
Part 3, clauses 9 to 13.
Madam Chair, I beg to move that Part 3, Clauses 9 to 13 stand part.
Question is that Part 3, clauses 9 to 13 stand part. All honourable members in favour, please say aye. All honourable members against, please say nay. Methinks the ayes have it.
Part 4, clauses 14 to 19.
Madam Chair, I beg to move that Part 4, Clauses 14 to 19 stand part.
The question is that Part 4, clauses 14 to 19 stand part. All honourable members in favour, please say aye. All honourable members against, please say nay. Methinks the ayes have it.
Part 5, clauses 20 to 22.
Madam Chair, I beg to move that Part 5, Clauses 20 to 22 stand part.
The question is that Part 5, clauses 20 to 22 stand part. All honourable members in favour, please say aye. All honourable members against, please say nay. Methinks the ayes have it.
Report. Minister.
Madam Chair, I beg to move that we do not report to His Honour the Speaker the passing of one bill in committee.
The question is that I do now report to the Speaker the passage of one bill in committee. All honourable members in favour, please say aye. All honourable members against, please say nay. Methinks the ayes have it.
Chairman of committees is reporting the passing of one bill in committee.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to move that this bill be read a third time.
The question is that the bill be read a third time. All those honourable members in favour, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Me think the ayes have it.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to move that this bill be now passed and cited as the Income Tax Country by Country Reporting Act 2021.
Question is that the bill be passed and so cited. All those honourable members in favour, please say aye. Those against, please say no. We think the ayes have it. This bill is passed and so cited. Honourable Leader of Government
Thank you,
Business.
Mr. Speaker. I beg to move the suspension of the sitting until 2 p.m.
Seconder, please. The question is that this Honourable Chairman be suspended until 2 p.m. All those honourable members in favour, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Meeting the ayes have it. This Honourable Chamber stands suspended until 2 p.m.